What's good, fam? Teacher Eddie here with a live stream. I love doing live streams, man. I don't know what it is about it, but I guess it's hanging out with y'all. I love hanging out with y'all. I love doing these live. I'm the type of person who really, actually, in all honesty, I hate being told what to do and when to do it, especially when it's me telling me what to do and when to do it. So even with these live streams, it kind of like, you know what, I'll just do it whenever, and I'll put it out like 40 minutes, half an hour in advance. I'm a spontaneous type of person. So today we're doing Oversimplified, which even though they give me hella problems, I still love their videos and I love reacting to them, even though they give me such a headache for whatever reason. So this one is Prohibition. I have been looking forward. This is honestly, I know y'all asked me to do the Russian Revolution, which I did, the Cold War, all that jazz, but this is the one I've been looking forward to the most, because this is, in all honesty, one of my favorite time periods as a historian. It's one of my favorite time periods to talk about, and also it's a time period that is amongst the most influential in American history, because with Prohibition, you get the rise of course, gangsters as we know them, right? You get all the gangster lore, you get the Capones, Lucianos, you get all the illegal rum runners. It's taking place, of course, during the Roaring 20s, which then leads to the Desperate 30s after the Wall Street crash. Then, I mean, as far as crime goes, true crime, there's really been no better muse, so to speak, than Prohibition, which was one of the dumbest laws that could have been passed. It still baffles me that not only was it passed, but it was passed as a constitutional amendment. And it's the only amendment that another amendment had to basically cancel it. So the 18th Amendment is basically just null and void. And it was a hectic time. It was a crazy time. I'm sure Oversimplified is going to get into it. I'll expound upon it. But then, of course, we also get the classic gangster movies, which is honestly what I grew up on. My first big love in movies were movies with James Cagney, Humphrey Bogart, George Raft, all the classic Warner Brothers gangster movies, Angels with Dirty Faces, The Public Enemy, Edward G. Robinson in Little Caesar, Paul Muni in the original Scarface. So without further ado, like, I'm just so excited. So let's get started.
A mug of hard cider, and a full bottle of wine. Oh boy! Oh, I'm running late. I'll have to take it with me. Don't forget your lunch. It's a 6-pack of beer, a flask of whiskey, 6 shots of tequila, and as a special treat, a banana. Oh, gee
Ooh, nice.
whiz. I'm gonna
Some
be
potassium.
smashed today. Enjoy your day of operating sharp, dangerous farm equipment. I can't believe this is an acceptable way to live. God bless America. Okay, gotta go.
Wait, what the fuck? I was expecting him to drive something through, but what the fuck is with the goat with the hula skirt? Oh my goodness. Oversimplified, I love you.
How's my life? America, the land of beautiful strip malls, top-class infrastructure, and wonderful urban sprawl.
True.
Ah, yes. Beautiful America. But what's the most American thing you can think of? The Statue of Liberty? Mount Rushmore? A crazy lady in a mobility scooter yelling at a pigeon? Well, what if I told you the answer is alcohol? That's right. When the Puritans arrived on America's shores, they brought a ship packed with beer. George Washington provided his men with a daily cup of whiskey. Andrew Jackson's inauguration party left the White House so trashed that everybody had to be ordered outside. Frederick Douglass said whiskey made him feel like a president. Me too, Frederick. Me too. Americans drink a breakfast.
Whiskey makes me feel like a lot of things. Well, you know what? Wait, hold on. I do have... Oh, hold on. I got it right here. Always have a bottle of Jameson Irish whiskey handy. So this is absolutely true around this time. And you also have to remember that clean drinking water isn't something that was readily available at the time. You know, we're not talking about a time where you can go to the 7-Eleven or the Wawa or a Tim Hortons or whatever your local convenience store is and just get yourself a bottle of Poland Spring. Or one of the benefits of living in New York City is I can drink water straight from the tap and it is delicious. But there are still many places, I'm looking at you, Flint, Michigan, where unfortunately clean water is an issue. And we're talking about a time where clean water was an even bigger issue. Let's see. I saw a couple of questions in the chat here as well. I'm going to try to keep up with y'all. Hope everything's going swell. Thank you so much. Is it true that Al Capone hated being called Scarface? 100% true. 100% true. He absolutely hated being called Scarface. Much like Benjamin Bugsy Siegel hated being called Bugsy. Try calling Bugsy to his face. You're going to get beaten either to death or pretty close to death. But yes, and whenever Al Capone took pictures, he always made sure. That's why you see a lot of profile pictures like this, because he's trying to hide the scars on his face. He actually, when I did a tour of Brooklyn, I actually drove past because he got those scars in Brooklyn where I live. He was a bouncer at a nightclub in Coney Island, and he got a little frisky and fancy with a woman there. And then I forget if it was her boyfriend or her brother. I forget which one. He's the one who gave him them scars. Hey, want to know how I got these scars? Yeah, trying to bang a chick. That's why you got that syphilis, Capone. Did you ever watch Boardwalk Empire? Absolutely, I did. Let's see. Were tea and coffee a big thing back then in the U.S.? Coffee, yes. Tea, I am not sure. I'm honestly not sure if tea was a big thing. But yeah, so again, that's why alcohol, and that's why the founding fathers, that's pretty much all they drank was wine, whiskey, beer. Not because they were looking to get drunk constantly, but hey, that's what was readily available to drink. So yeah, they wrote the Constitution, they made all them decisions while they were drunk as fuck.
Doctors prescribed their patients hard liquor. In the 19th century, Americans drank 3 times as much as their modern-day...
That is an interesting fact. You literally could go to a bar with a prescription for alcohol, and they would give it to you. And it was like, man, and you would have little kids like going for their parents, like they didn't give a shit. You go to the bar, like, here's a prescription from doctor, you know, got those demons in my blood. He said I should do whiskey about it. But yeah, you could go back then into any bar with a prescription and a little, you know, either a tin can or something, and they would give you your alcohol.
Counterparts. That's a lot of whiskey. Hey Jerry, how's that report coming along? Already done, sir. I've also organized your paperwork.
Might as well take a shot.
Flowers and been a father figure to your children. Wait a minute. What's that smell? Have you been drinking at work? No, sir, I would never. Well, why not? Everyone else is doing it, but I got all my work done. You're fired! Americans drink at work. They drink at barn raisings, baptisms, and public hangings. Heavy drinking was so normal that it was as...
Yeah, public hangings, as I've discussed in a few other videos, as well as in lynchings as well. These were huge public events. I mean, this was like the pay-per-view of its day. This was like the UFC. You know, everybody would gather up for the pay-per-view. They would bring alcohol. People would sell souvenirs. In some cases, they would even sell parts of the person's body. People would take pictures like they were in front of like the Eiffel Tower of the person being hung. It was a pretty disgusting thing at the time. Let's see. Somebody asked, why was Prohibition put in the first place? Well, that's what we're here to find out. There were several main reasons.
American as apple pie. Hi, everyone. My name's Ron. and I'm an alcoholic. Get over yourself, Ron. We're all alcoholics. But more and more Americans began to wonder whether all of this truly was a normal way to live. Were Americans drinking, perhaps, a little too much? Well, one group in particular thought the answer to that was yes. You know him, you love him.
Yep.
Miro provides an infinite
Women are
canvas
going to
for
play a bigger
cross-functional
women.
teams to collaborate without constraints.
Women get a lot of blame, but I'm gonna let them finish. I'm not gonna Kanye them. But women are again a major driving force because this is also around the time it coincides with women getting the right to vote. So I'm sure they're going to get into some of the reasons, and I'll try to expound upon them.
Oh, crap. Woman, run! Hang on. We just want to talk. Woman talking in public? That's great. Come on.
You hear that? I heard that whisper in the background.
On. We just want to talk. Women talking in public? That's
Women talking in public?
great. Come on, Fred. You've got 2 kids and a wife at home. Yet here you are spending your entire paycheck on booze. And you, Dr. Spanky, you were on the cusp of discovering time travel. But what did you discover instead? The sweet, sweet joys of whiskey. That's right.
That explains Doc Brown a lot over there. I see you, Doc Brown.
Alcohol. It's destroying our families, our jobs, and our homes. She's right. She's right. You know. Hang on, men. Don't let them get to you. This saloon is our safe space where our wives and children can't annoy us with reality, where we're free to be real men. She's right. Yeah. She's right. I am a man. And what is it real men do? Take care of their families. I don't know what she's talking about. Do you take care of your family?
I don't know what she's talking about. I like that. I don't know what you're talking about. I have no clue what you're talking about. How dare you?
Drink beer, we shoot guns, and we mud wrestle! As America's heavy drinking ruined more and more lives, moral resistance began to arise, and women were at the forefront, taking matters into their own hands at a time when women doing just about anything was shocking. They'd had enough of being victim to their husband's heavy drinking, and they were going to do something unprecedented. You're going to what? I'm going to protest.
Uh-oh.
Oh, sweetie. Women can't protest.
Boo to booze.
Starting in Ohio, before spreading nationwide, women began a crusade against alcohol. They marched through towns and cities, singing hymns, gathering outside saloons, and praying on their knees. Women praying was so terrifying that in some towns, schools were shut and business stagnated. On one occasion, firemen were called out to hose down the dangerous praying women. On another, the owner of a beer garden reportedly held a cannon outside and threatened to reduce the savage women to dust. Nevertheless, they persisted. They formed the WCTU in 1874.
Yep, the temperance movement. The Women's Christian Temperance Movement. This was a major driving force. But again, it's not, you can't just blame all this on the women. Even though, of course, just like everything in history, whether it's Pandora opening a box, whether it's Samson getting his hair cut off by a side chick, women get, all the blame. Are they partially to blame? Absolutely. But they get the brunt of the blame when they really shouldn't.
And they organized. They set up homes for inebriate women. They installed water fountains in public parks. They wrote textbooks for school children that contain some interesting claims about drinking alcohol. Here's little Timmy. Uh-oh. Looks like Timmy's gonna have his first drink. He's taking a small sip of whiskey, and Timmy has spontaneously combusted. The end. The woman's efforts weren't in vain. In small towns across America, drugstores agreed to stop fulfilling prescriptions for alcohol. Men committed themselves to giving up drink. Inspired by the woman's moral fervor, some saloon owners closed their doors. The Women's Crusade and other temperance movements were forcing people to reconsider alcohol's role in society, and more people began to side with the growing temperance movement. Many states had even begun enacting their own dry laws that restricted the sale and use of alcohol. One of them was Kansas, where alcohol had been outlawed since 1881. Despite this, many illegal saloons remained open, and authorities had done just about nothing to stop them. One woman, disgusted by what she saw, decided she would take the law into her own hands. And not just any woman.
Oh, I know. Oh, hell yeah.
Sweet old lady named Carrie Nation.
Carrie Nation. Yo, you want to talk about a bad woman? And I'm not talking like she was a bad person. That's a badass woman right there. Look at that face. Just look at that face, man. Look at them eyes. Look at the crazy in them eyes, man. Yo, that is the type of woman who will chop your dick off with that little axe, man. Yeah, and I see the questions coming in. I'm gonna try to get to most of your questions. Of course, if you really want to grab my attention, man, support Teacher Ready. Come on, man. Drop a dono there, and then I'll definitely answer your question. Yeah, Carrie Nation does sound like a YouTube name. I mean, just such a great name.
Armed with her trusty hatchet and a bag of what she called smashers, she traveled from town to town visiting saloons. But she wasn't there to get smashed. She was there to smash.
Yes.
The men could do nothing but cower as sweet little Carrie hulked out and tore the place to shreds. She went to Kiowa and smashy smashed. Wichita, smashy smashed.
Smashy
Topeka,
smash, son.
Smashy smash. On a couple of occasions, she was arrested. But each time, they were like, okay, Carrie, we're gonna let you go so long as you promise to be a good girl and not smash up any more saloons.
Yeah, okay.
Screw you, pig!
Pretty much.
Yeah, I think she's gonna be all right. Smash, smash, smash. Carrie's tactics shocked the other members of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, but she assured them, and this is a quote, "Ladies, you do not know how much joy you will have until you smash, smash, smash." Carrie,
Bro, legit, man. She was like the Hulk. She was like the Hulk. She was a Carrie smash. She was smashing the nation.
became a household
Nation.
name, and she hoped her unusual tactics would spread across the country. But unfortunately, many of the women's movements eventually slowed down. Why? Well, because of this kind of thing. Thelma, I ripped my pants again. Ugh, well, you'll have to sew them yourself because I'm going out protesting. What? I don't know how to sew. What if I burn the house down and get eaten by alligators? What? Don't be stupid, Mitch. Look, I've got to go.
I already know what's gonna happen.
She's stupid. She's the one who's stupid. Hey, Thelma! Look who's stupid now!
Oh, hey. How you doing? Ram.
See, while the women were out protesting, there was nobody to do the cooking and cleaning and being seen and not heard, and they gradually had to return to their duties at home. But where the women had got the ball rolling, a new movement was about to take that ball all the way to Washington, D.C.
Oh,
I'm talking
hell
about
yeah.
the Anti-Saloon League.
Yep.
The Anti-Saloon League was a political pressure group run by a very sweet-looking old man. But don't let that deceive you. This guy was an evil genius. While the women's movements were interested in a whole range of issues, Wayne Wheeler and the Anti-Saloon League only cared about enemy number one, Mr. Alcohol. And as a result, they were extremely effective. They were able to exploit the fears of the American people. And I mean everyone's fears. Here's how they did it. Hello, sir. Welcome to the Liberal Progressive Rally. Why don't you introduce yourself? Well, I'm Patty, and I'm an immigrant from Ireland. And tell me, Patty, do you drink? Oh, yes. I drink a lot. See, folks, people like Patty come here looking for a better life, only to end up drunk in the gutter. Don't worry, sir. We're gonna help you. Hey, man, you're doing great. I just need you for one more thing. Hey, Christian conservatives. This is Patty. He's a dirty Catholic Irish immigrant who's come to destroy America with his alcohol-fueled debauchery! Workers were told alcohol was a capitalist ploy to keep them subjugated. Factory owners were told alcohol was making their irresponsible workers lazy. The black community was warned alcohol was hindering its progress, while
Yeah, so Wayne Wheeler, talk about... hold on, the blur there was freaking me out. Talk about diabolical geniuses. It's hard to compare Wayne Wheeler to really anyone else as far as it went pitting sides against each other perfectly. I mean, the way he did it was absolutely just diabolically genius. I'm not trying to compliment him in any way, but hey, you got to respect. Game respects game. So again, this is why I say you can't completely blame this whole thing on women, which is what history has tried to do. That was all the women's fault, because once the women get the right to vote, what is the first thing they do? They vote in Warren G. Harding, among top candidate for worst president ever. Even though I think there have been, of course, worse presidents. Looking at you, Andrew Johnson. So they elect Warren G. Harding because they thought he was cute. right? They thought he was the Bill Clinton of his day, but he was like Bill Clinton dialed up to 11 by not giving a fuck. Yeah, he's like, yeah, you banging like chicks in White House bathrooms and closets. He's like, yeah, absolutely. That's what I do, right? So, and then their main cause was prohibition, right? But they were doing it for, one of the questions was prohibition similar to the war on drugs? Yes, in the sense that it was trying to outlaw what was deemed by society as being an illicit substance for the betterment of that society. But at the same time, there were vital issues, and there were, whether it be domestic violence, whether it be husbands not providing for their families because they were just drinking all their money away or gambling it away, it was ruining the fabric of the American family. But again, these wars on illicit substances always proved to be nonsensical, right? So it was similar to the war on drugs, except that this war fortunately ended, right? So prohibition lasted for just a little bit over a decade. And then once FDR's elected, he was like, yeah, nix that shit, okay? And the strange part was that consuming alcohol was not illegal. It was the sale and distribution of alcohol that was illegal. So when prohibition goes into effect, people had a year's notice. They had a 1 year notice, and they stocked up on all the, especially wealthy people. And there were plenty of people who had booze throughout the entire prohibition era. They stocked up their basements were just full of booze. So it was not illegal to own it or drink it. You just couldn't produce it or sell it. But again, it's people like Mr. Wheeler here who were the actors, because women weren't in the Senate, women weren't in Congress, women weren't in the executive branch. They couldn't make the actual decisions. It was men who did it.
Alcohol would turn black men into brutes. In one of the most confusing eras of American politics, totally opposing groups found themselves agreeing on at least one thing: alcohol was bad. The Anti-Saloon League also made great use of propaganda, something prohibitionists have been doing for decades. Take this specimen, for example, that warns what will happen to you if you start drinking. Let's see. First you take a drink, you get a little rowdy, okay. You make some new friends, nice. Then you become homeless. You turn to crime, and But the most effective tactic Wheeler used to force prohibition on America was pressure politics. In any election he could, Wheeler very successfully rounded up support against any politician who was in favor of alcohol. In Ohio alone, he had 70 state representatives and the popular Republican governor ousted from office and replaced with prohibitionists. Suddenly, every politician in America...
I mean, come on, man. The phrase, no one man should have all that power, applies to Wayne Wheeler like a motherfucker. Let's see. Am I a prohibitionist? I don't know. Except this war brought us Al Capone. Well, yes, this war brought us organized crime for decades to come and gave organized crime all of its power, as well as many Americans who benefited tremendously financially. Of course, the greatest example is the Kennedy family. Papa Joe Kennedy was a bootlegger. That's how they built their family fortune. But, as you say, except this war brought us Al Capone, the war on drugs is, I mean, not even comparable as far as the amount of destruction the war on drugs has caused. It has decimated, because the war on drugs, the big difference there is it was targeted against specific communities, mainly minority communities, poor communities, more so than affluent, wealthy, white communities. That, I would say, is the big difference between the war on drugs and the war on prohibition. War on drugs, of course, has been going on for what seems like forever. The war on drugs has no statistic that proves that it was or is in any way a deterrent. If in fact, if it did anything, it made it stronger. Just like prohibition, made organized crime. It birthed organized crime as we knew it, the Italian mafia, the commission, everything else. But I mean, you want to talk about Al Capone? Al Capone ain't got nothing on the war on drugs creating Pablo Escobar, who was responsible for killing more politicians, judges than any other, than probably all of the mafia combined in all of history. So the war on drugs is much, much worse than Prohibition was.
America was afraid of Wayne Wheeler. Even those who enjoyed alcohol in private began pretending to be against it in public. Alcohol is delicious. Malicious. Sorry, Wayne. I'm really drunk right now. Then it really hit the fan in 1917 when America found itself fighting in the First World War against Germany. Anti-German sentiment exploded.
Yes. So this is the version of, if you remember, after 9/11, when America decided, like, hey, France sucks. So no more French fries, freedom fries. No more French toast, freedom toast. Thankfully, that didn't last long. But in of course, World War I, just like in the sequel, the Germans were the bad guys, right? The sequel was much worse. And Americans started having major German phobia. This was another leading cause for Prohibition.
Became Liberty Cabbage. German measles became Liberty Measles. And Daxels became the embodiment of evil. See, America? You've always been this way. The biggest brewers in America were German, and Wheeler saw to it that drinking alcohol became akin to pro-German treason.
Another brilliant move on his part.
Back, creating their own propaganda, presenting beer as a healthy beverage, one that you could even give to your kids. As you can imagine, it didn't go down well. President Wilson instituted some temporary wartime prohibition measures to save grain for food. And with many in the country now in support of prohibition, all that was left was to make it law. One problem was that taxes on alcohol made up nearly 40% of the US government's annual revenue. And the government wasn't just about to give that up. No problem. The Anti-Saloon League helped lobby for the creation of a new income tax on the
That is one of the major. Talk about what's the lasting effect of Prohibition? The creation of the income tax.
American people. And just like that, the government was no longer reliant on alcohol. Prohibition was finally introduced to Congress in 1913, not just as a law, but a constitutional amendment. In 1917, as the House held their final vote on the Prohibition Amendment, Wheeler was watching from the gallery.
See, that's the thing. The Founding Fathers, in their brilliance, made amending the Constitution a very difficult process. Not just, that you need basically 3/4 of the states to vote and everything else, but they made it a very long process in hopes that if, because look, any country, not just America, but especially America, can get very emotional and get carried away by propaganda and everything else. The Tea Party, Freedom Toast, communism. I mean, every decade has something, right? So they made it a long process. So as you can see, it was introduced in 1913, but it took 4 years for them to vote on it, and then another couple of years for it to actually go in effect. So they did it, the founders did it in hopes that if there was some kind of irrational, emotional cause, that it would not pass, because there have been so many constitutional amendments presented, hundreds, but only a few have actually passed. So this was done purposefully, but this paranoia was perfectly perpetrated by all these different movements at the time, by World War I, by anti-German sentiment, by the women's movement. So again, you can't blame it on just one small group. Again, the women get all the blame on this. Even by some historians, they still tout that, but I do not believe that.
You spineless cowards. I know half of you drink, yet here you are bowing down to Ned Flanders up there. Look at him, like he's some kind of Caesar. Ugh, don't be so dramatic. I obviously don't think I'm Caesar. Now release the lion. In the end, Prohibition passed the House easily, 282 votes to 128, and the states ratified the new amendment by 1919. America, a nation obsessed with liberty and freedom, had just voluntarily given up its private right to choose whether or not to drink alcohol. We did it, folks. We fixed everything. America will be perfect forever. But you just dissolved America's 5th largest industry and lost tens of thousands of jobs for us immigrants. No, you idiot. You don't get it. We helped you, idiot. Ugh, I could really go for a beer. Oh, no! Immediately after Prohibition went into effect, alcohol consumption in America decreased as Americans followed the law and tried not drinking. Man, if we're gonna be law-abiding good boys, we need something else to fill the dark, lonely void that delicious beer once did. Well, how about we crack open a nice cold can of water? Hell yeah! Toss it over. Nah, this isn't doing it for me. Let's try knitting. This isn't filling the dark void at all. Wanna fly some kites? Ah, screw it. Let's go get some illegal beer. While it seemed like many Americans supported Prohibition, after the law went into effect, it seemed like just as many Americans intended to keep on drinking, and they would go on to find a variety of ways to break the new law. Here's a question for you. Do you like breaking the law?
Hell yeah.
Shame on you. Or do you like saving money when you shop online? Then
oh boy,
you should use
honey. Let's skip through this.
Scours the a Baby Yoda smell promos. Have found a stinky idiot today. Flash over. Oh yeah. Punching Patty, passing Prohibition, and procuring pints. Pretty soon after the new law went into effect, the failures of Prohibition were already beginning to rear their ugly head.
Yeah, so I guess they skipped over the part, but I mentioned it earlier. So the law passed. It became a constitutional amendment, the 18th Amendment. But it was a year until it went into effect. So people were on notice, like I said. So for a full year, you were able to stock up on all the alcohol you wanted. So obviously there was no talk about a fire sale, and people stocked up. So again, they say illegal beer. Beer itself was not illegal. Again, it was the production and sale of it. But if you had 500 kegs of beer in your basement for your own personal use, you were safe. There was no issue. So that's what a lot of people did. Of course, mostly wealthy people could afford to have, a large stock. Poor people, the other 99% of the country, they really couldn't afford to stock up for years in advance.
Heads. For starters, the details of the new Prohibition law, written by none other than Wayne Wheeler himself, turned out to be more draconian than expected. Many Prohibition supporters only wanted to outlaw hard liquor and hoped beer would remain legal, but the Volstead Act outlawed anything over 0.5%. That would make Liberty Cabbage illegal. Secondly, the new law was full of loopholes that Americans very quickly began to exploit. For example, while the sale and manufacture of liquor was illegal, drinking it wasn't. And you could also keep any alcohol you had before the law went into effect.
Okay, so they covered
clubs hoarded huge amounts of alcohol that saw them through the entire Prohibition period. Whiskey intended for medicinal purposes was also allowed, and doctors basically...
All right, my bad, Oversimplified. You covered it. Let's see. Hi, Eddie. Have you ever seen the show Making a Mob? Season 1 is about New York crime families focusing on Luciano. Yeah, I watched it. I didn't like it that much because, number one, I am so familiar. Because, again, the history of the mafia is something that's always fascinated me. True crime in general, serial killers, the mob, all that stuff, and its effect on American society has been something that I am so interested in. So I did see it. A lot of the stuff in there was not very well researched, in my opinion. But for I guess a novice, it might be okay. What's your favorite gangster movie? That is impossible, man. Godfather 2 would probably be number one for me, but I do love all the old Warner Brothers gangster movies. Probably Angels with Dirty Faces and Paul Muni's Scarface from 1932, directed by Howard Hawks, I would put up there. And of course, Goodfellas is just absolutely just a perfect movie. I was actually talking about Goodfellas just today. But I do prefer Godfather 2 to Godfather 1, even though Godfather 1 is a masterpiece as well.
practically became bartenders. It looked as though a full-on epidemic had broken out, as there was a sudden surge in prescriptions for whiskey. Sacramental wines used by churches and synagogues were also permitted. Orders for communion wine suspiciously skyrocketed by millions of gallons. And as rabbis had access to religious wine, suddenly everyone was becoming a rabbi. You had Rabbi Pat O'Leary, Rabbi LL Cool J, Rabbi Fluffy. But don't worry, I'm sure all these definitely legitimate religious figures couldn't possibly be selling wine in a back alley after Mass. Yep, definitely nothing strange going on here. New products also hit the shelves in stores, such as Vine Glow, a brick of dehydrated grape juice, itself not alcoholic, and therefore perfectly legal. But the packaging did contain a strangely specific warning. After dissolving the brick in a gallon of water, do not place the liquid in a jug in the cupboard for 20 days, because then it would turn into wine. I'll take 1,000. Yes, sir. Now, at this point, I want you to think back for me, if you will, to the year 2005. You're the coolest kid around, and you convince your parents to rent the greatest movie of all time from your local Blockbuster. But the movie starts with a strange message, something about not downloading a car. You immediately disregard that and hop on Kazaa to download the greatest song of all time, and in the process, drain your dad's bank account with copious amounts of ransomware. You were breaking the law, you bad boy or girl, but did anyone come to arrest you? No. That's my point. If no one's enforcing a law, while everyone's breaking it, is it really a law? And so it was with Prohibition. See, the conservative-led governments of the decade were also the kind of people who believed in small government spending. So they'd passed a law that would be extremely difficult to enforce, but also didn't want to spend any of the money required to enforce it. The newly created Bureau of Prohibition only had 1,500 agents to cover the entire country. That's one agent for every 70,666 Americans. In a massive country with 12,000 miles of coastline and one gigantic land border with Canada. Good luck, schmuckos. And all these clever little loopholes people were using to score illegal booze were only just the beginning. America was about to devolve into alcohol-fueled criminal chaos.
Oh, yeah. So I saw a question. Did Prohibition spread to any other countries? Hello from Norway. The only other country I know off the top of my head that passed Prohibition actually the same exact year in 1919 was Finland. And Finland repealed it around the same time, or maybe like a year or two before America repealed it. So obviously it didn't work in either country. There were other countries like Sweden that tried alcohol rationing. So it wasn't a straight prohibition, but it limited the sale of alcohol and consumption of alcohol. So yes, there are many other countries, and throughout history, whether it be the Aztecs, the Japanese, prior to America, going back to even ancient times, where prohibition was tried by different societies, but it just never worked.
Petco.
Why is the drinking age 21? That's a good-ass question.
By outlawing it, Prohibition had made alcohol a precious commodity, and millions of Americans would become outlaws as they found a variety of ways to score illegal booze. For example, many Americans began making their own liquor. Illegal stills from making moonshine were found by Prohibition agents from the hills of Kentucky and the caves of Arizona to parking lots.
Yeah, the other issue with these with moonshine was, number one, much like making meth nowadays, a lot of moonshine operations. People had them in their basements, in their sheds, very volatile. So there were a lot of explosions. There were a lot of deaths, much like with the whole, meth thing. I'm looking at you, Florida. And also, of course, when it fell into the hands of people who didn't know what the hell they were doing, and they were making moonshine that was literally turning people blind, killing people. So that was another huge issue. Were people trying to make their own liquor.
Lots in major cities, and even in the homes of Prohibition-supporting politicians. Oh, come on now, fellas. I voted for Prohibition. I'm not gonna have an illegal still. What's this? That's my son, Freddie. Hi, Freddie. Sir, this is obviously an illegal
I'll
still.
drink to that.
How dare you? Hey, what's this in the bath?
How dare you?
That's bath water. Why does it taste like alcohol? Here's a better question. Why are you tasting my bathwater? Weirdo.
Facts! Why are you tasting his bathwater,
Let's get away
son?
from these perverts. To discourage moonshining, the government began adding extra toxins to many of the products moonshiners were using, which resulted in many cases of severe illness and death. But alcohol wasn't just being made at home. Along America's vast coastlines, rum runners smuggled alcohol into the country by sea. A floating supermarket known as Rum Row extended along the East Coast just beyond America's maritime limit, and bootleggers frequently sailed out in small boats to pick up shipments of booze. These bootleggers could then be found selling their illegal products everywhere, even in the holes of Congress. Wow, Pop. One day, I want to work here. Well, son, if you work hard and never give up, one day even you could be a massive hypocrite. Even President Harding was known to serve as cabinet bootlegged whiskey, and some bootleggers were so successful, they became bazillionaires, such as Roy Olmsted, an ex-cop who became one of the biggest employers in the Seattle area from smuggling booze. Unfortunately, all of his whiskey came from Canada. Yuck! All of this criminality was being made possible by copious amounts of corruption. Across the country, armies of government officials were persuaded to turn a blind eye. Bootleggers became so rich, it was no problem to stuff a couple $1,000s into the front pocket of the police chief, or the mayor, or their disapproving mother, and some cops were getting almost as rich as the bootleggers. Alright men, everyone gather in. I've received word that one of you has been taking bribes from bootleggers. Any ideas who? Kevin, perhaps. Got any thoughts? No, sir. Many police officers came from the same communities that drank a lot, and they weren't about to arrest their own granddads for knocking back some homemade gin. But all this isn't to say there was no enforcement. Plenty of government officials were doing their best to enforce the new laws, and some unlucky individuals received very harsh penalties, such as a Michigan mother who was sentenced to life in prison for small-scale moonshining. Cases like these were widely reported in the media and only served to make Prohibition even more unpopular. Yeah, so these were basically just catchy headlines, you know, much like with, you know, even the war on drugs. I mean, there's still crazy corruption. Is it as bad as it was like in the 70s and 80s? No. But of course, it's still there. But during Prohibition, number one, the issue with the cops were, as they mentioned, most of the cops were not going to arrest people from their own neighborhood. Number two, a lot of the cops saw this law as absolutely unjust. And number three is a lot of the police officers at this time were immigrants themselves. So, and they weren't being paid well. So the promise of making basically a whole year's worth salary every month, I mean, it's so difficult to turn down, especially when you feel like the law is completely unjust. But not just that. The media also loved to cover the exploits of the most famous bootleggers, turning them into national icons. One of the biggest bootleggers was a man named George Remus. Originally a lawyer, he watched as his bootlegger clients paid off enormous fines like it was nothing, and proclaimed bootlegging's the business for me. But unlike most bootleggers, Remus had big brain, and he came up with a pretty clever system. See, there were millions of gallons of liquor produced before Prohibition that were sitting in distillery warehouses, and it could only be sold with government permission to drug companies. So Remus set up his own drug company and bottled the liquor. Then he set up his own transport company to transport the liquor. And then he would send his own men out with guns to intercept his own transport vehicles. And this would happen. Hey man, this is a stick-up. Oh no, please don't hurt me. I won't hesitate to shoot. Please, I have a wife and kids. Hand over all the whiskey, Fatty. Hey! Fatty isn't in the script, you jerk! After stealing all the whiskey from himself, he could then sell it for big bucks. The perfect crime. Unfortunately, Remus was eventually caught by a goody two-shoes Prohibition director in Indiana who wouldn't take Remus's bribes, and the government found Remus guilty of violating the Volstead Act 3,000 times. For 2 years, as Remus sat in prison, his wife promised to take care of all of his money. And by take care of his money, she meant have an affair with a Prohibition agent, sell off everything Remus owned, and file for divorce. When Remus finally got out and found his big fancy mansion empty with his wife gone, he reportedly broke down in tears. A few months later, during their divorce trial, he spotted his wife in a car in Cincinnati.
Y'all know what's about to happen.
Remus hopped in a cab and asked the driver to run her off the road. The driver was like, okay. Then Remus got out of the cab and shot his wife dead.
Lights
he
out.
Immediately handed himself into the police. And his next trial, this time for murder, became a national sensation. Remus defended himself, claiming insanity, occasionally carrying out skillful questioning, occasionally crying in the corner. But the nation felt bad for him. His wife had screwed him over, and so when after just 19 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned and declared him not guilty, the court erupted into celebration. And just to remind you, this guy bluntly admitted to murdering his wife. The American justice system. Mwah.
Yeah, there you go, man. Talk about OJ all you want, son. George Remus was the original OJ. Yeah, I mean, he was a household name. It was basically like the OJ trial. I know a lot of you are too young to remember, but the way that the OJ trial swept the nation. I mean, there was nothing on TV for like a good year except for the OJ trial. They were playing that shit on primetime television all morning, all afternoon. Then the news was talking about it. I mean, that's basically what the Remus case was like, except that they were hoping that Remus would get off.
As alcohol poured into the nation, a lot of it was going to a new type of drinking establishment that had been booming in popularity. A secret drinking establishment. So secret that from the outside they often look like ordinary shops or homes. So secret that you usually needed a password to get in. So secret that everybody knew about them. Speakeasy.
Pretty much.
And once you were in, the party went all night long. Scantily clad flappers, snake ladies, jazz. It was a roaring time to be alive. Some publications even posted reviews of these illegal clubs, and bribes galore kept the party going. It seemed like half the police officers and federal agents in cities like New York were receiving kickbacks from speakeasy owners.
Half is being polite.
What the Kevin Costner is going on here? Officer O'Hannity, taking bribes. Why am I not surprised?
Kevin Costner? Reference to Kevin Costner playing Elliot Ness in The Untouchables. Elliot Ness, who gets all the credit for bringing down Al Capone, when pretty much everything he did had nothing to do with bringing down Capone. Elliot Ness is not a hero at all. He was actually a shitty person at the end of the day, and he himself was an alcoholic. So talk about hypocrites. He was a big-time alcoholic.
Prohibition director Simmons? For shame. Mom? What would Dad say? Ask him yourself. Dad would say, quit being such a wet blanket and let Daddy earn his tips. Anytime a speakeasy was shut down by authorities, it seemed like 3 more would just pop up elsewhere. And some neighborhoods were so full of them that one resident began hanging a sign to try to keep partygoers from constantly knocking on her door. It really seemed like the new laws regarding alcohol, in some places, were simply being ignored. And one Prohibition agent who traveled the country liked to see which city was the most defiant by timing how long it took for him to be offered a beer after he arrived. His winner? New Orleans, where a cab driver offered him a drink after just 35 seconds. Bravo! Many voices in Congress were already speaking out against Prohibition and its failures. To display how ridiculous the whole thing was, one Republican congressman gathered the media to all come and watch him drink a homemade beer. When he asked a passing police officer if he'd like to arrest him, the officer said no. Hey Wayne, is all this what you had in mind? I thought we were gonna make the country better, but it almost seems like it's worse. What do you mean? Alcohol consumption is down. Well, that may be true in your small town world, but it says here drinking in some areas is up, as are arrests for public intoxication, drunk driving, and incidents of liver cirrhosis. The general chaos has turned America into a nation of criminals with no respect for the law, and all these attempts at enforcement are just costing the economy valuable money and eating up judicial time and resources. Release the lines. The social change and corruption that Wheeler and the Anti-Saloon League had been so eager to prevent, in the cities at least, was surging. See, when something's legal, you can usually regulate and control it, but make that thing illegal, and often anything, becomes fair game. Legal drinking age, gone. Mandatory closing hours for clubs and bars, gone. Other unspoken sociocultural rules surrounding alcohol, gone, gone, gone.
People shouldn't pee in their neighbor's mailbox while singing Danny Boy. I feel personally triggered by that one. But yeah, it's an absolute fact that in cities especially, the consumption of alcohol rose dramatically, and especially with teenagers. And teenage deaths due to alcohol consumptions also skyrocketed, whether it was drunk driving, alcohol poisoning. So yeah, it didn't work to do anything, because the other issue, once you make something illegal, is even people who were like not really interested or into it, now they want to do it, right? It's kind of like when your parents tell you as a kid, hey, don't do that. You're like, oh, I should do that then. There's a reason they don't want me to do that. Let me do it. You ain't going to tell me what to do. You ain't the boss of me. I'm going to drink when I want.
Gone. In speakeasies, different genders and ethnicities were beginning to mingle in a way they hadn't done before. The Roaring Twenties saw a monumental shift in culture, not least of all because now men and women could flirt in public without being damned for eternity. An outraged Wayne Wheeler did his best to make sure that anyone breaking the law was punished. He had even stricter legislation put in place in New York. But all this did was clog up the justice system with petty drinking violations, and judges began letting everyone off with light fines so the judges could get back to dealing with things that actually mattered. You know, things like murder. And there was plenty of murder, because
customize and save.
Because of Liberty Mutual. Well, yeah, I used to have Liberty Mutual, and Liberty Mutual does suck. Liberty Mutual is the absolute worst insurance company. I switched over to Geico, and I literally saved not 15%, but like 80%. Liberty can suck a dick.
Bootleggers and moonshiners were one thing.
Oh, that's a good question. If Wayne Wheeler was in an ERB, who would be a good opponent for Wayne Wheeler? Off the top of my head, as far as somebody who didn't hold like a high office, but basically had so much control, for me, maybe it's my New York bias, but I would say Robert Moses. And if most of you are scratching your head and like, who the hell is Robert Moses? Robert Moses was the guy who basically controlled New York City. He had more power than any governor, mayor, anybody. And he changed the entire landscape of New York City forever. And that's why he was known as the power broker. Lyndon Johnson might be a good one. He was a master manipulator when it came to politics. So, you know, those would be like off the top of my head, maybe those two.
But Prohibition had given another kind of criminal an opportunity to make a fortune. Mobsters and gangsters. Hey, Fat Tony, big news. Hey, Fat Joey, what's up? I just got word from Fat Louie here that the government's outlawing alcohol. You know what that means. That means we're gonna be rich. Quick, call Fat Polly and let's go hijack a liquor truck now. All right. Hang on, let me tell my wife first. Hey, Fat Susan! No pizza for Fat Joey tonight, capiche? Stop calling me Fat Susan! Forget about it.
Hey, what are you talking about? Forget about it.
Cities,
yeah, Rob N, that's a good point. Abstinence only in sex education works. Right? Yeah, exactly. Telling people that they can't do something is the worst way to prevent people from doing something. Just look at wearing masks during coronavirus. It's just such a simple thing, but once you told people it's something they have to do, you have a bunch of people, I'm not wearing a mask, violates my human rights. Man, go fuck yourself.
Each other's transports, assassinating rivals, and trying to take control of their city's illicit booze trade. Every city had its top dog. Detroit had the Purple Gang. New England had Charles King Solomon. But no city was as infamous for gang violence and murder as Chicago. The city had multiple gang factions, and at first, they agreed to stay in their own neighborhoods. But the thing about criminals is that they're criminals, and the agreements inevitably broke down. One day, the leader of the Italian Southside gang was walking along the street when this happened. And he was like, you know, I think I'm done with this, and left for New York, leaving his crime empire to his chief enforcer, none other than Al Capone. Having been knifed in the face in his young...
Yeah, so the person they were referring to here who got shot,
and he was...
that's Johnny Torrio. So Johnny Torrio was, you know, the big wig at the time. He had taken over from an old Mustache Pete, who he had killed. And Capone at the time, the reason he left New York for Chicago wasn't because, hey, Chicago is the place to be. It's because he was trying to run from a murder rap. So he actually ended up killing one of his mentors, and he had to basically skip town. So that's when he hooked up with Johnny Torrio in Chicago, and he was basically Torrio's bodyguard at first. But because Capone was extremely intelligent, even though he wasn't educated, you know, formally educated, he was a brilliant criminal mind. I mean, there's no other way to go about it. And you got to remember, I mean, he did all this in his 20s. because he was very, very young when he was the boss of the entire Chicago outfit. He was in his mid-20s. So Johnny Torrio survives an assassination attempt, and much like later on, Frank Costello, same thing. Frank Costello was part of the New York outfit with Bugsy Siegel, Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello. And Costello was basically in charge of kind of the Northeast. And he survives an assassination attempt and is allowed to retire afterwards. So it's very rare, but it does happen. So after the assassination attempt on Torrio, Torrio basically blesses Capone to take over the Chicago outfit.
He was like, I think I'm done with this, and left for New York, leaving his crime empire to his chief enforcer, none other than Al Capone. Having been knifed in the face in his younger years, Capone earned himself the name Scarface. Although interestingly, he hated that nickname.
Oh, he
and preferred
hated
to be
it.
called Snorky. Snorky was
that was his nickname, Snorky. He had that from childhood. His brothers gave him that nickname, and he actually enjoyed it. Go figure. He didn't want to be called Scarface. He wanted to be called Snorky. What gang did New York have during Prohibition? Well, there were a lot of gangs in New York. At the time, of course, the big ones, well, there were two old Mustache Petes. Mustache Petes were basically old world, like OG mafia people who came over from Italy. So they were like the OG mob, and a lot of them did have mustaches at the time. But just much like Torrio took out the mustaches who were running Chicago, Lucky Luciano, again, Benny Siegel, Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, they took out the two top, what you would call the capo di tutti capis, the bosses of all bosses, right? So once they took them out, they basically took over New York. And then it's Luciano who creates the commission. And the commission basically organized the mob. And most of the negotiations did take place in Atlantic City, which I don't remember if Boardwalk Empire covered it, but I think they did. And Capone was offered to be the head of the commission, but Capone didn't want it. And at the time, Capone was kind of going a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. So Luciano became head of the commission. And the commission organized all the families from throughout the country and turned it into basically a paramilitary organization where each family had a boss at the top, like a general. Underneath them were their capo regimes or captains. There was an underboss. There was an advisor, kind of like a philosopher. And then you had the soldiers, right? So that's what organized crime eventually became.
Was ruthless, just like any other gang leader in America. But what set him apart from others, the reason he's become synonymous with 1920s gang warfare, is this. Most other gang leaders would try to keep a low profile because, they're killing and murdering and stuff. But
yeah.
Capone lived for the fame and kept an extremely high public profile.
Much like John
speaking
Gotti.
With the media about his exploits and presenting himself as a gracious host, providing Chicago with good times. No need to thank me, fellas. I just provide the city with a valuable commodity while doing away with the competition. You mean you murder people? Whoa, who said anything about murder? I just, force my rivals underground. When you do the thing with the hands, it seems like you're talking about murder. Whoa, look at you with the brains. No, I just help people retire.
Buddy, what are you talking about?
From life, so murder. Whoa! Al Snorky Capone was somewhat of an enigma, brutal in how he dealt with enemies, but in front of the camera, he was all smiles. One day, he'd be ordering hit after hit. The next, he'd be signing autographs in Wrigley Field. One day, he'd be bludgeoning members of his own gang with a baseball bat for conspiring against him. The next, he'd be playing Santa at a nearby parochial school. And no murder could ever be traced back to him. Just like every other criminal, he stuffed the pockets of city officials with cold, hard cash. And any who did try to oppose him sometimes found themselves being thrown down the steps of City Hall in broad daylight. Problem solved. The public couldn't get enough of Capone. He quickly became a household name as people romanticized the gang life he lived. And this became a source of concern for the people at the very top. President Hoover? What is it now, Miles? I'm busy. Well, it's just that there's a lot of crime, sir. Crime? How long's that been happening?
And also that, if anyone's curious, if you've ever seen the movie The Untouchables with Kevin Costner and Robert De Niro played Al Capone in that. Costner played Elliot Ness. Sean Connery was in it. The movie is horribly not factual. I mean, there are so many historical inaccuracies in that movie that it kind of makes me sick. But the baseball bat scene when De Niro beats to death somebody at a dinner party when he's talking enthusiasms, that is fact. Except in the movie, he beats one guy to death with a baseball bat, when in fact, he in real life beat 3 men to death at that dinner with a baseball bat. So that's one of the few things that the Untouchables movie actually got right.
Well, since the dawn of man, sir. What? Would you like me to blame it on the Democrats again? No, Miles, I want you to blame it on squirrels. Yes, the Democrats! Now stop wasting my time! Since having a crime lord controlling public officials and winning the hearts of the people probably wasn't a good thing, Hoover personally ordered that something be done about this Capone fellow. But before he knew it, President Hoover was also dealing with another major problem. You know him. You love him. Woman. The Prohibition era had been going on for nearly a decade, and anyone with a brain could see that it really wasn't going very well. One person with a brain was Pauline Sabin, an extremely influential and rich woman who served on the Republican National Committee, fundraised for Republican presidents, and had a secret wine room in her giant mansion. She initially supported Prohibition, but was now disgusted at the chaos it had created, and she began a new women's movement, this time not for Prohibition, but against it. Being the extremely influential woman she was, her new organization gained nearly 1.5 million members within 2 years, 5 times that of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. She hated that the WCTU claimed to speak for all women, and she began calling for the repeal of the 18th Amendment. President Hoover, I helped fund your campaign, and now I want you to end Prohibition. Miles, what is it I say when I'm not going to do anything? You'll look into it, sir. Oh yeah, that's right. Pauline? I'll look into it. Sabin gave speeches on the steps of Congress and helped start a growing push among the American people against Prohibition. But Hoover, a prohibitionist himself, wasn't budging. Then, on the 14th of February 1929, something happened that shocked the nation. Men, thought to be working for Al Capone, tricked some Irish mobsters into meeting them at a garage in Chicago, thinking they were there to purchase hijacked whiskey. Instead, the mobsters were lined up against the wall by men dressed as police, and they were shot. The Valentine's Day Massacre had people outraged. It was cruel, and almost felt like American mobsters had finally crossed a line. People were sick of the violence, and in part, they blamed Prohibition for helping to create it. The pressure on Hoover to do something was steadily increasing. Fine. Miles, I want you to put a report together to see if this whole thing is working. You mean the thing where mobsters are becoming increasingly powerful and massacring each other in the streets and everyone is disregarding the law and half our public officials are corrupt and taking bribes? That thing? Yeah, I want to know if it's working or not, Miles. Stop wasting my time! Hoover continued to drag his...
Yeah, I'm sorry, fam. I saw that in the chat. Yeah, you're right. I should get a moderator. It hasn't happened before, but I went and deleted those messages. But yeah, so I did hear part of it. So the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which is one of the most infamous events in all of gangster history. I mean, so many movies have been made about it. So Capone was not in charge of all of Chicago, right? So there was the north side, there was the south side of Chicago. So Capone, I believe Capone was in charge of the, I want to say the south side. But the Irish were in charge of the north side, and one of the leading ones was Paddy O'Banion, who owned a flower shop. So O'Banion was basically Capone's main rival at the time. Yeah, the Valentine's Day Massacre was not very lovely. Absolutely, Rehan. And while O'Banion was the main, person that Capone wanted to take out, O'Banion, fortunately for himself, was running late to the meeting. So Capone took everybody out except for Dion O'Banion. So O'Banion actually survived the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, even though he was the main target.
feet on Prohibition, but after the Valentine's Day massacre, he was still determined to do one thing. He wanted Al Capone in prison. Since Capone had been so careful, the FBI were having a hard time charging him with anything, but eventually...
The other issue with the FBI, so, as they mentioned earlier, enforcement of the law was very difficult, right? Because of the police corruption and all that stuff. But also at the same time, the FBI, which was invented at this time, and of course J. Edgar Hoover was the first director of the FBI and lasted for over 4 decades as the director of the FBI. They didn't have much authority, because if you were chasing a criminal and they had crossed the state line, they had no federal authority to go and chase them. The second thing was they weren't allowed to carry guns. So how the hell are you going to enforce anything when not only do all of these mafioso have guns, but you have the introduction of the probably most famous gun of the era, which is the Thompson submachine gun, or the Tommy gun. So how are you going to enforce anything when you're outmanned, you're outnumbered, and you're outgunned, right? So the other lasting, thing that Prohibition creates, aside from the federal income tax, aside from organized crime, is the FBI, and again, a federal police force.
Actually, they got him. Capone, we know you're supplying Chicago with alcohol and you've been involved in countless murders. Whoa, look at you with the crazy talk. I ain't done none of that stuff. But you're rich, right? You're damn right I am. And so where'd all the money come from, Capone? All right, I'll let you in on a little secret, but you gotta promise not to tell anyone, okay? I don't pay my taxes. Whoa! For all of his murdering, the IRS finally got Capone on tax evasion. At his trial, he didn't seem too concerned though, and spent most of his time having a laugh with his lawyers. Hey Capone, I gotta know, why are you so confident you're gonna win here? Well, Your Honor, because I'm an honest man with a big heart who's passionate about working for the good of the people. And also because I threatened the entire jury's families. Luckily, at the last minute, the judge replaced the entire jury pool with a new one.
Okay, yeah, so this is depicted in the Untouchables movie, but again, giving all credit to Elliot Ness for making this happen. Again, Elliot Ness had nothing to do with anything. In fact, if you're interested in researching federal agents who actually made a difference, the one and probably the most successful one, and one of the most badass motherfuckers out there, was an agent named Melvin Purvis. Melvin Purvis, Purvis. Melvin Purvis is everything that Hollywood wanted you to believe that Elliot Ness was, and then some. Melvin Purvis is the one who actually brought down a lot of the criminals of the era. Elliot Ness didn't do shit.
Capone's men hadn't yet got to, and Capone was found guilty. He was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison, the harshest penalty ever given to a tax evader.
Yes,
but
to this day.
Capone locked away, the violence in Chicago and other cities continued, and in response, the movement against Prohibition continued to grow. And the final nail in Prohibition's coffin came in 1929. After a decade of booming economic growth under 3 Republican presidents, the stock market plummeted, and America was thrown into the grips of the Great Depression. It was an awful time. 1 out of every 5 workers, 15 million people, would lose their jobs. Half the nation's banks failed. Temporary shantytowns were built for the broken homeless in public parks. Suddenly, very few people had time to care about Prohibition. Expensive enforcement of an unenforceable law didn't seem like that big of a priority when people were having their homes repossessed and losing their life savings.
And also because, again, it had become such an unpopular law where people were celebrating the gangsters of the time. They were viewed as heroes. I mean, there is some truth in what, they depicted during the trial of Capone, being for the average Joe. Because Capone, for all the bad he did, did set things up like soup kitchens for the poor, housing. He did give money. He gave a lot of money to various charities, families, things of that nature. He organized a lot of things that did benefit the community. But of course, it was all based on blood, right? Blood and murder. And that whole, well, the mob only killed each other. They never killed civilians thing. That's absolute nonsense. Many civilians died during the mob wars. And the other issue with Chicago was when Capone went away to prison, his underboss takes over, Frank the Enforcer Nitti. And Frank Nitti, while being one of the toughest guys, scariest guys you could ever meet, was not one of the smartest guys you could ever meet. And he actually eventually committed suicide.
And many began to argue that repealing Prohibition would create vital jobs and tax revenue for the government. Yet President Hoover doubled down. Here's that report you asked for, sir. Gimme. Prohibition is great. Fantastic news. Sir, it says here Prohibition is great at undermining the rule of law in America. Miles, it says the word great. That means good. Now stop wasting my time! The public, increasingly shocked at the violence they saw in the streets, the corruption they saw in the government, the general disregard for the law, and now an economic calamity, had enough. For his re-election, Hoover faced a Democratic candidate who promised to finally do something about prohibition, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Crowds cheered as FDR made his campaign speeches promising to modify the Volstead Act, and Pauline Sabin, a lifelong Republican, along with her 1.5 million supporters, endorsed Roosevelt. And on Election Day, it was a landslide. Before FDR had even taken office, Republicans in Congress began the process of passing the 21st Amendment to repeal Prohibition. One of FDR's first acts as president was to pass the Beer Permit Act, which made beer legal while the new amendment was being ratified. In 1933, with the passage of the 21st Amendment, Prohibition was finally over, and the people celebrated like they'd just won a world war. Bars and taverns were packed. The WCTU were inconsolable. Wayne Wheeler was dead, and the celebration, particularly in America's cities, was intense. Heading into the mid-1930s, the effects of Prohibition were clear to see. From now on, culture around drinking had changed, with men and women drinking together, not in saloons, but in bars and taverns. The crime syndicates that had been given so much power through Prohibition remained powerful as they moved on to other things. Extremely powerful. Some states opted to remain dry, with Oklahoma only repealing its Prohibition laws in 1959. To this day, there are still counties in America with some form of Prohibition.
There are.
So what did we learn today, kids?
Crazy enough.
What's the big lesson here? What's the moral of this story that we can all take away and apply to our day-to-day lives? Maybe that you shouldn't force your own morals on others who don't share them? Maybe that if you tell Americans not to do something, that's the one thing they'll definitely do.
Oh God, I feel like they're calling out the vegan teacher for me right here.
Or maybe there is no lesson. Maybe we're all just a bunch of dumb, stinky idiots, and we're all doomed. The end.
All right. That was a lot of fun. I loved it. Even though I know I'm going to get a copyright notice from Oversimplified in a couple of hours. But it is what it is. I really enjoyed that. Let me see some of the questions here in the chat. Let's hang out for a minute. I think I've heard of Elliot Ness before with the Cleveland torso murderer. Might be mistaken, but if he's the same guy, then yeah, he's terrible. Absolutely, yeah. I've seen that. You probably watched it on BuzzFeed Unsolved. I love BuzzFeed Unsolved. I'm just so sad that they had to leave BuzzFeed. But then again, a lot of people apparently leave BuzzFeed because it's not a great place to work at. But yes, Elliot Ness was involved in the Cleveland torso murders. But again, at that point, he was a major alcoholic. His wife had left him. He was just a mess. But again, Elliot Ness is a Hollywood creation more than anything. He really was an extremely ineffective agent, and was viewed by most people, most of his contemporaries, just viewed him as a bumbling fool, really. But, you know, the press always wants and needs a hero, and he fit the bill. What can I say? But again, if you're really interested in federal agents, Melvin Purvis is the man to look into. Melvin Purvis was involved in all the what's his name, Dillinger, just so many. it is interesting how the FBI came to be during that time. Yeah. So the FBI, or what they would call G-Men. I love G-Men. G-Men was also a movie starring James Cagney where he took a turn at playing a G-Man instead of a gangster. But yeah, the FBI, it was just so ridiculous that they were tasked with, enforcing these laws. But number one, there were so few agents throughout the country. Number two, they had no federal power. And number three, they couldn't even carry guns. It was ridiculous. So the lasting effects of Prohibition are, again, the creation of the income tax, which some people are still fighting to this day and saying it's unconstitutional. The creation of the FBI, the creation of many different powerful people and entities, such as, of course, J. Edgar Hoover, who arguably became more powerful than most of the presidents that he survived throughout his 40 plus years as director of the FBI. I think he died in 1975, somewhere around there. Of course, the mob, as we knew it, that would be in power for decades to come because of all the money they made during Prohibition. And it gave them the ability to organize nationwide and to get into all the things they would get into, whether it was pornography, drugs, prostitution, etc., to the point where they controlled major cities. Like in the 70s, the New York Mafia, the Gambinos, the Colombos, I mean, they literally controlled New York City. They could shut down the city if they wanted to because they controlled all the unions. And of course, families like the Kennedy family who made their fortune during Prohibition. That obviously affected history. And, many other things. So Prohibition was a major, major failure, mistake, everything else. And unfortunately, we didn't learn our lesson because, as, people mentioned in the chat, the war on drugs, which starts with Richard Nixon in the 1970s, which has been an epic failure. There is no statistical evidence to show that the war on drugs has done anything except for bolster the criminal element, basically repeating what happened during Prohibition, but it's been going on for almost 50 years, right? Who is your favorite VP? My favorite vice president? That is a good question. My favorite vice president? That's a tough one, man. I'm gonna have to think on that one. Let's see. I live in a town that sat on 2 counties, and at one point, one county was dry and the other one. Oh, yeah. I like men also. I mean, G-men. Good one, Rob. Let's see. If you had the power at the time period, is there anything you would have done differently? Yeah, told people, stop this fucking Prohibition thing. Let people drink. I like Walter Mondale. Really? Walter Mondale, that's an interesting one. Walter Mondale was like, he got graped by Reagan. That's his lasting contribution. Is he's the guy who got annihilated by Reagan. I think he got like 3 electoral college votes. The only thing white people that were able to get ahead with bootlegging because my great grandfather was one and he didn't get the money and the power. Well, but a lot of people did. Sorry, I don't care about spammers. Screw them. They're not even worth our breath. I think I answered most of the other questions. What's the next video? Who knows? I don't plan these videos. Like I said, I have nothing planned. I don't do any research in advance. I don't look at anything. I just hit the play button and give you a genuine reaction. If I miss some stuff, I miss it. If I get some facts wrong, that's okay. We all make mistakes. We're not perfect, but I just want to be original, genuine, raw, like I promised. I don't want to do it like some other people do it when it's obvious that they prepare in advance for these. Some people call me out and say, well, you don't look in the camera all the time. Well, because I'm a one-man operation here who's monitoring the chat, looking at the questions, and also looking at my OBS and all that other stuff. So it is what it is. Plus, why you want to make eye contact with me? Here you go. There you go. Look at my pretty blue eyes. There you go. So yeah, so I don't plan my videos either. It's kind of like I just sit down and I just look at, all right, what's on my list here? What looks good? All right, I'm going to do that. That's about it. So I have no clue what the next video is ever going to be. But other than that, I don't see any other questions here about the time. And there's really nothing they didn't cover. I mean, they didn't go in depth into the Mafia stuff. Because it would have just been a much longer video. But again, I absolutely love that stuff. And I think Jacob wants to say hello. You want to say a quick hello to the live audience?
Hi, Banana.
Hey, Banana. Okay. I've been Teacher Eddie. I absolutely love this. Enjoyed this. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for hanging out with me today. I hope you had fun. And again, I'm probably going to do a lot more live streams because I don't know. I just feed off the energy of you guys and it makes it even better. So I think I'm going to do a lot more live streams going forward. I'll see you next time. Fam! And as always, shining out the Patreons who keep things running here, starting with the Chancellors, Elena G, Nazvanyu, Douglas C, KP, the Hollow King, the Principals, Aaron Shepard, Addison, Clement, Vijandra, Rachel, Alex, King Panda, Freeman, Moody Kakari, Nathan, Chad, Chris Debago, Sophia, Robin, Lord Gandalf, Luna, Harry, Robin, and Blue Tech. And of course, Rasmus. I've been Teacher Eddie, and I'll catch you next time.